Welcome back. We're watching the last presidential debate. We're here with a sociologist and a political scientist, Jail Cornelio from Ateneo and Richard Haydarian from the LSU. Your reaction to this round? They tackled some really key issues. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, now, of course, they discussed the issue of OFWs and the issue of inclusive growth. Of course, they first started with the contractualization issue, and we could see that all of the candidates were very much strong on it. I think Duterte started with a very strong emotional, statement on the issue of contractualization, and has emphasized that he has consistently been against contractualization. And we have really seen a very serious Duterte, right? In the second round, almost no more jokes, no more humor. And I think maybe that also explains why the debate is a little bit more flat than usual. Let's be honest. If you remember the second debate, it got more and more feisty as the rounds went by. But this time, it seems everyone is serious. They're just emphasizing their point of view. So I think Duterte, he doesn't give much of policy details sometimes. But the opening statement had, I think, strong emotional resonance. But later on in the debate, he gave more details on that point.
Let me go to Jail.
Yeah, sure.
Your reaction, Jail.
Well, there were two issues, right? Unemployment and OFWs, right? And the welfare of OFWs. In many ways, I must say that I am actually somewhat disappointed with how it turned out, this particular round, because I felt that many of the things that they were saying are already in place. The welfare of OFWs, the support that they need there when they are in crisis, for example, or the problems of contractualization. Who doesn't know about that to begin with? So I felt that there were many other issues that they could have tackled, in particular the problems of both job mismatch in the labor market, for example, that I think will strengthen the support system for our labor sector. And then two, the problem of underemployment. That I think is a much bigger problem. Of course, our unemployment is the highest in the region, 6% or thereabouts, or 5.8 I think in January this year. But underemployment is still at 19.7%.
Which wasn't mentioned at all.
Which wasn't mentioned at all.
Richard, you mentioned Duterte, right? He has been consistent, but yet he himself, when he was the mayor of Davao, hired contractual labor. Right? This is according to COA. I mean, no real details. Contractualization is a global problem. What did you make of that?
Yeah. Well, I think the format is a little bit different, right? If this were a more interactive format, I think you would have some of candidates going after Duterte and saying, what about your own record?
Sure.
But I think there was not much opportunity for that, and no one really went after Duterte. I mean, I'm surprised. I was expecting this debate, people will go more after Duterte, given the fact that he's enjoying a huge lead. And yet it seems everyone is more focusing on their own message.
Yes.
And Duterte so far has been doing a very good job. I think he has avoided pitfalls. He has not made any outrageous statement. And so he seems very much statesmanly in this debate compared to the previous one. On the taxation issue, I was a little bit disappointed with some of the candidates. They seem to throw a lot of free candies, but they're not...
So many promises in
So
there,
many
isn't
promises,
there?
Reduction or abolition of income
tax,
taxes,
for
reduction
example.
of corporate
tax,
taxes. I mean,
Are these even possible?
Exactly, that's my point. And I think that is where Mark tried to come back and say, it's good to give these promises, but you will not be able to run a government if you keep on just getting rid of taxes. And Moros, I think, is the only candidate who's not for a reduction of the income tax.
Yes.
We have the highest, I think, in Southeast Asia.
We do.
But I think the way to go for the taxation issue is to say it's not the nominal rate, but it's the tax loopholes and tax collection, because we have one of the lowest tax effort in the world. I think around 13% of our national economy only. So no one raised the issue of proper collection of taxes and loopholes, which I think was a disappointment. But I think some of the candidates were a little bit irresponsible with throwing out this, general notion of let's get rid of taxes. That's not how you should do it as a president. Yeah.
Sure, of course that would appeal to a lot of working class, right? People in the working class. And if I were in their shoes, I would appreciate, if I would receive that promise without really recognizing the implications on the larger economy. I would have wanted, though, if these candidates focused on more fundamental problems, why contractualization happens, for example, or the problem of job mismatch, right, in the labor sector, what I just mentioned. Unemployment, as I said, is our unemployment rate is the highest in the region.
Right.
And in fact, if you look at the statistics even more closely, you realize that 50% of those unemployed are in fact young people, 15 to 24,
the people
right? People who have just graduated,
Yes.
or many of them, of course, are out of school school
Right.
youth.
What's interesting is that Mar Rojas actually said this is the highest employment rate. We didn't
Sure,
hear,
fair enough.
we didn't
fair enough.
hear
That's true.
the flip
That's true.
side, which is
That's
that
right. Well, to be fair, of course, the unemployment rate has been decreasing, and thanks to the many investments, right? But we know that inclusive growth or inclusive development has not really gained traction simply because the investments have not been. Generally speaking, very strategic. The
Yeah.
poorest of the poor, we know this, are the fisher folk
Yeah.
and farmers.
Yeah.
So to a certain extent, I think Miriam was on track when she said that investments have to be in agriculture, supporting infrastructural
Yeah.
developments in those areas. Why? Because the biggest, again, you look at the statistics, and I wish the candidates were really sharper on this one. If they should have been aware that the biggest proportion of our job market is one in the service sector, and then two the agriculture. So they
Right.
were talking about investments in manufacturing and industries, but I think only about 16% of the labor sector is in industry. And even more importantly, or ironically, I suppose, it's those industries that support our economy.
Right.
So a huge burden rests on a very, very small
Yeah.
proportion.
I think you
of
can
the
actually
labor
connect
sector.
the OFW and inclusive growth issue.
Yes,
And I
yes.
think Miriam did a very good job. Again, a quotable quote. I mean, being OFW should be an option choice,
Yes.
not a necessity. I think which
Fair enough,
everyone
yeah.
kind of agreed
Sure.
on. So the real question
Sure.
here is, how do we create the kind of growth that provides employment? And there's so many studies on that you have to work on your industrial policy, on your
Right.
trade policy, and also on your agriculture, because agriculture is also not only for food security, not only a source of employment, but it's also a backup for your manufacturing. So I was disappointed that people like Marojas, who claim to be very experienced, technocratic background, he didn't have much explanation to offer on how his administration will be different
Sure,
from the status
sure.
quo, because the status quo is creating growth, but this is
Sure.
in low to medium and services sector, and that's not going to create jobs.
Sure.
if you were to gauge who won this round. Oh, we're going back. Thank you, JL. Back to the debate. See you soon.